Marlene Okafor had $11.40 in her bank account on the morning of her son's birthday. Not $11.40 after rent, not $11.40 after utilities, $11.40 before any of it. That was the birthday, the dinner, and the gas to get to the night shift at the packing plant on West 5th in Gary, Indiana, all living inside the same number. Her son turned 10 today. He was sitting on the front steps of their apartment building, tying his sneakers with a double knot, the only knot that still held on a pair of shoes he had been wearing for 3 years. The laces were not original. The sole on the left one was not level. He tied them the way he always did, carefully, without rushing, in the way that said he had been taking care of things longer than any 10-year-old should know how to. 3 years before that morning, Marlene Okafor stood in a discount shoe store on Michigan Avenue in Gary with $31 in her purse and a 7-year-old boy beside her who had just started 2nd grade. She picked up a pair of white sneakers from the clearance rack, $24.99. She looked at the tag. She looked at Isaiah's feet. She picked up a size and a half larger than what he needed, not because she didn't know his size, because she knew exactly how long the next pair had to last. She counted the bills in her hand, 20s, 5s, 1s. She did the math standing in the aisle the way she always did the math, quietly in her head without letting her face change. $24.99 plus tax. That left enough for bread, eggs, and bus fare through Wednesday. She bought the shoes. Isaiah put them on in the parking lot. He didn't wait until they got home. He sat on the curb, pulled them out of the box, laced them up, and stood. He looked down at his feet, the way children look at new things, like the world had just shifted slightly in his favor. Then he ran. 30 feet down the sidewalk, turned, ran back. The soles were bright white against the concrete. Marlene watched him from the car and held on to that image, the way you hold on to something you already suspect will have to carry more weight than it should. The shoes needed to last 2 years. That was the plan. They would last 3. She didn't know that yet. Isaiah's father was a man named Derek Okafor. He had been in the apartment on Polk Street until Isaiah was 5. Then one Tuesday he wasn't. No fight, no door slam, no bags packed in the hallway. He just didn't come home. Wednesday, the same. By Thursday, Marlene had called his phone 11 times. By the following Monday, she had stopped calling. She told Isaiah his father was working far away. She said it once clearly, the way you say things to children when you need them to accept something without understanding it. Isaiah asked about him 3 more times over the next 2 months. Each time Marlene gave the same answer, working far away. Then he stopped asking. She knew the moment he understood. Not because he said anything, because he started folding his own clothes. 5 years old, standing on a step stool in front of the dresser, folding his shirts into small squares with a precision that no 5-year-old arrives at naturally. Careful in the way that said he had decided without anyone telling him that the house now had fewer hands and his needed to be 2 of them. She watched him do it from the hallway. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. She went to the kitchen and made dinner. That was 2 years before the shoes. By the time she bought them, the apartment had settled into its rhythm. 1 income, 1 parent, 1 child who had learned to read silence the way other children read picture books. Quiet, in the way that said he had been listening to things no 7-year-old should have to decode. Alert, in the way that said he knew when rent was late before the envelope arrived. Not because anyone told him, but because the kitchen got quieter on those days and his mother's voice got 1 note higher when she said everything was fine. Marlene watched him run back down the sidewalk in those new shoes, white and clean and a size and a half too big, flopping slightly at the heel with every step, and she thought 2 years, just hold together for 2 years. Then she started the car. She drove home. She made dinner. She went to work that night at 10 p.m. and came home at 6:30 the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. The shoes held. Isaiah grew into them by November. By spring they fit perfectly. By the following fall they were exactly his size, which meant by winter they would start to get tight. But that was later. For now, in that first autumn, the shoes were still new enough to pass for new, and Isaiah was still young enough to believe that a pair of sneakers from a clearance rack was a thing worth running for. The first year moved the way first years move when you are doing everything alone. Not fast, not slow, just relentless. Marlene worked the night shift at Harmon Packing on Industrial Drive, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. She packed frozen meals into shipping crates under fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency she stopped hearing after the first month. She came home at 6:30, made breakfast, got Isaiah dressed, walked him to the bus stop at 7:45, came back, cleaned whatever needed cleaning, slept from 8:30 to 2:00 if the sleep came, which it mostly did because her body had stopped asking permission and simply shut down when it could. She picked Isaiah up at 3:15, made dinner, helped with homework, put him to bed, sat at the kitchen table for 1 hour of silence. Then she got dressed and did it again. Every day was the same day worn in a slightly different direction. She didn't think about it in terms of hard or easy. She thought about it in terms of next. What was next? What needed to happen in the next hour so that the hour after that could happen too? That was how the math worked. Not in days, in hours. Keisha Williams worked the same shift at the plant. Same line, same fluorescent hum, same 3 a.m. break in the room with the vending machine that only reliably gave change for dollar bills. Keisha was 37, had 2 teenagers, a husband who drove long haul and was home every third week, and the specific energy of a woman who had decided years ago that if nobody else was going to say the true thing, she would. They sat in the break room one night, 5 a.m. paper cups, the coffee that tasted like it had been made by someone who had been told what coffee was, but had never actually tried it. Keisha looked at Marlene. She said, "When's the last time you did something for yourself?" Marlene didn't answer. She took a sip from the cup. Keisha said, "That's the answer." Marlene said, "I went to the store last week." Keisha said, "For Isaiah." Marlene said, "Groceries count." Keisha looked at her with the particular patience of someone who knows the conversation isn't going to go further tonight, but is planting it anyway. She said, "Marlene, groceries do not count." They went back to the line. They didn't talk about it again. But Keisha had said it, and Marlene had heard it, and sometimes that is how things begin. Not with agreement, but with a sentence that sits in the back of your mind and waits. Isaiah grew. The shoes held. He didn't complain about anything. Not the early mornings, not the dinners that were sometimes just rice and whatever sauce was on sale, not the apartment that got cold in January when the heat cycled off between 2 and 5 a.m. He did his homework at the kitchen table. He put his plate in the sink. He said, "Please and thank you, and yes, ma'am," in the way that said someone had made those words important to him before he was old enough to decide for himself. One afternoon in late October, Marlene came home and found his shoes by the front door. It had rained that day. The shoes were wet. Beside them a damp washcloth folded neatly. He had wiped them down. 7 years old. She stood in the doorway, looking at those shoes and that cloth, and she did not say a word about it. She put her bag down. She made dinner. She went to work. Some things don't need to be said. Some things just need to be seen. Lorna Jeffries lived in the apartment directly below Marlene's on the second floor of the building on Polk Street. She was 74 years old. She had been a home economics teacher at Roosevelt High School in Gary for 35 years before she retired. Her husband Calvin had died 6 years earlier. Her son Raymond lived in Atlanta with his wife and called every Sunday at noon, which Lorna appreciated and which Lorna also knew was exactly enough contact to satisfy his conscience without requiring any real adjustment to his schedule. She did not blame him for this. She understood the arithmetic of adult children and aging parents. She had watched it play out in other families for decades. She simply noted it and moved on. Lorna knew Marlene's schedule before she knew Marlene's name. She heard the footsteps above her at 6:30 every morning. The front door, the stairs, the heavy walk of someone carrying tiredness the way other people carry groceries, both arms full, trying not to drop anything, then the water running, Then 20 minutes later, a smaller set of footsteps. A child waking up. Lorna had heard that rhythm before. In parent-teacher conferences, in hallway conversations, in the break rooms of schools where mothers showed up still wearing the uniform from the overnight shift. She knew what it sounded like when a house was being held together by one person. She had heard it hundreds of times in 35 years. The sound never changed. One afternoon in November, Marlene's bus was late. 20 minutes late. Isaiah sat on the front steps of the building with his backpack on his lap, waiting. He was not fidgeting. He was not looking around. He was sitting with the kind of stillness that said this was not the first time, and he had learned how to wait without it becoming a problem. Lorna opened her door. She walked to the steps. She sat down next to him without saying anything. Then she went inside and came back with a glass of orange juice. She set it beside him. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said, "Thank you, ma'am." Lorna looked at him for a moment longer than felt casual. She said, "You've got good manners. That means someone's doing a hard job well." Isaiah took a sip. He didn't respond to the compliment. He just drank the juice and waited for his mother. When Marlene arrived out of breath, already apologizing, before she reached the steps, Lorna was still sitting there. She stood up. She said, "I'm Lorna. I live right below you." Marlene looked at her the way she looked at most people who approached without warning. Guarded. Not rude, but measured, the kind of measured that comes from years of handling everything yourself and learning that most offers of help came with a cost or an opinion or both. Lorna saw it. She didn't push. She said, "I'm downstairs if you ever need anything. Or if you don't need anything. Sometimes that's better," Marlene said. "Thank you." She took Isaiah's hand and went upstairs. Lorna went back inside. She didn't knock on Marlene's door that week or the week after. She didn't bring food. She didn't ask questions. She waited. She had been a teacher long enough to know that trust is not a thing you offer. It is a thing the other person decides to take, and only when they are ready. The second year is when things began to show, not all at once. In pieces, the way a wall cracks one line at a time, so slowly you can pretend each one is the last. Isaiah was 8. 3rd grade. His feet had grown faster than Marlene had planned for. The shoes that had been a size and a half too large were now a half size too small. The sole on the left one had started to wear unevenly, tilting inward, so that if you looked at him from behind while he walked, you could see the lean. The rubber on the right toe had begun to separate from the canvas. He pressed it back down with his thumb every morning. He didn't mention it. At school, a boy named Marcus looked at Isaiah's shoes during recess. He said something. The script does not tell you what Marcus said because Isaiah never repeated it. What happened was this. Isaiah looked down at his shoes. He looked up. He walked to the other side of the playground. He didn't run. He didn't say anything back. He just moved. The way you move when you have decided that the cost of responding is higher than the cost of walking away, and you have already learned how to make that calculation at 8 years old. Marlene's car broke down on a Tuesday in March. The transmission, according to the mechanic on 7th and Broadway, $380 to fix. $380 or no car. No car meant no way to get to the plant when the bus didn't run on the late route, which was 2 nights a week. She paid the $380. That month, the electric bill went past due. A yellow notice arrived in a white envelope. She opened it at the kitchen table, read it, folded it, and put it in the drawer before Isaiah came home from school. She would figure it out. She always figured it out. That was not a boast. It was a fact that had become a weight. One night, 2 a.m. Marlene sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a piece of notebook paper. She was writing numbers. Electric $142 overdue. Rent due in 9 days. Groceries $40 for the week if she was careful. Gas. Isaiah's school supplies for the spring project, $12 she didn't have yet. She was adding, subtracting, adding again, trying to make a set of numbers produce a result they could not produce the way she did every month, as if this time the arithmetic might land differently. Isaiah was standing in the doorway of his room. She didn't know he was there. He had woken up from the sound of the pen on paper, that small scratching that traveled through the thin walls of the apartment, the way most sounds did. He stood there for maybe 2 minutes. He watched her write numbers, and cross them out, and write them again. He didn't know what the numbers were. He just knew his mother was awake at 2 a.m. and her shoulders were doing the thing they did when she was carrying something she wasn't going to talk about. He went back to bed. He didn't say anything. He didn't say anything the next morning either. Marlene picked up Isaiah's shoes from the mat by the front door that Friday. She turned them over, looked at the sole. The left one was nearly smooth in the center. The right toe was separating again, despite the glue he had pressed into it. She held them and thought, I need to buy him new shoes. Then she looked at the notebook on the table, the one with the numbers. Then she didn't think about the shoes anymore. The following week, a Saturday, she was straightening up the living room when Isaiah came in from the steps outside. She picked up the shoes from where he'd left them by the door. She turned the left one over, ran her thumb across the sole. Isaiah watched her from across the room. He said, "They still work, Mom." She looked at him. He was standing by the couch with his hands at his sides, looking at her with an expression that was too steady for an 8-year-old, too aware. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that exists only to let the other person believe you are fine, which is itself a kind of labor that never appears on any list. She put the shoes down. She said, "I know, baby." She went to the kitchen. She started dinner. Miss Terrell gave the assignment on a Tuesday in April. 3rd grade. 5 sentences, minimum. The prompt was written on the board in green marker. Write about someone you admire. Most of the children wrote about athletes. A few wrote about parents. One boy wrote about his dog, which Miss Terrell allowed because she had learned in 22 years of teaching that the quickest way to kill a child's willingness to write was to correct what they felt. Isaiah sat at his desk for a long time before he started. He didn't look at what anyone else was writing. He looked at the blank page. Then he picked up his pencil and wrote without stopping. He turned it in at the end of the period. Miss Terrell collected the papers. She read them that evening at her kitchen table, one after another, the usual mix of short sentences and large feelings that 8-year-olds produce when you ask them to describe something real. She got to Isaiah's paper near the bottom of the stack. She read it. She stopped. She read it again. He had written about his mother. Not in the way children usually write about their mothers with big general words like nice and the best. He had written specific things. He wrote, "My mom goes to work when it's still dark and comes home when it's still dark. I don't know when she sleeps." He wrote that she makes breakfast every morning even when her hands shake from being tired. He wrote that she checks his homework at the kitchen table, and sometimes her eyes close for a second and then open again, and she keeps going. Miss Terrell sat with the paper in her hands for a while. She did not write a grade on it. She did not send a note home. She did not call Marlene. She folded the paper carefully and put it in the top drawer of her desk at school the next morning. She kept it there for the rest of the year. She never told Isaiah she had kept it. She never told anyone. Some things a teacher holds on to not because they know what to do with them, but because putting them back in the pile with everything else would feel like a kind of carelessness. Isaiah turned in his paper, went back to his seat, and looked out the window. The playground was right there. Other kids were lining up for recess. He didn't get up. He sat at his desk with his hands folded and watched the empty swings move slightly in the wind. He stayed there for the full 20 minutes. Miss Terrell noticed. She did not ask him to go outside. She let him sit. Marlene never knew about the paper. She never knew what her son had written, or what he had seen, or how precisely he had been watching her. She went to work that night the same way she always did. She came home the next morning the same way she always did. The paper sat in a drawer in a school 4 miles away, and the boy who wrote it tied his shoes and went to class and said nothing about any of it. That same week, on a Thursday evening, Marlene did not make it up the stairs. She came home from the plant at 6:40 a.m., 10 minutes later than usual, because the shift supervisor had held the line for a recount on a pallet. She walked through the front door of the building, started up the staircase, and stopped on the landing between the 1st and 2nd floor. She sat down, not because she chose to, because her body chose for her. She sat on the concrete step and put her head against the wall and closed her eyes. Lorna's door was 6 feet away. Lorna had been awake since 5. She heard the front door open. She heard the footsteps start. She heard them stop. She waited 2 minutes. Then she opened her door. Marlene was sitting on the step with her jacket still on her bag on the floor beside her, her eyes closed. She wasn't asleep. She was just not moving. Lorna did not say, "Are you okay?" She did not say, "What's wrong?" She sat down on the step beside her. She didn't say anything at all for about 3 minutes. Then Lorna said, "I taught home economics at Roosevelt for 35 years. Marlene opened her eyes but didn't turn her head. Lorna said, "You know how many single mothers I watched come through that school? Hundreds, maybe more. Every single one of them thought she was the only one barely holding it together. Every single one of them was wrong about that. They were all barely holding it together. That's what holding it together looks like." Marlene was quiet. Lorna said, "My mother worked for a family on the south side of Chicago, 1962. She cleaned their house, cooked their meals, raised their children alongside her own, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week." A pause. Lorna said, "The family she worked for didn't know her last name. 12 years, and they called her by her first name like she was furniture that could also make pot roast." Marlene turned her head slightly. Lorna said, "My mother never complained, not once. And when I was old enough to understand what that cost her, I realized that the silence wasn't strength. It was just the only option the world had given her." She looked at Marlene. She said, "The system is not built for women like you. I don't say that to discourage you. I say it so you stop blaming yourself for things that were designed to be hard." The stairwell was quiet. Somewhere above them, Isaiah's alarm would go off in 40 minutes. Marlene didn't respond. She didn't nod. She just sat there, and Lorna sat with her, and the silence between them was not empty. It was the kind of silence that happens when someone has said something true, and the other person is letting it find a place to land. Lorna stood up after a while. She said, "Same time tomorrow if you want, or not." Marlene said, "Thank you, Mrs. Lorna." Lorna looked at her. She said, "Lorna, just Lorna." She went back inside. Marlene sat for another minute. Then she stood up, picked up her bag, and climbed the rest of the stairs. The 3rd year was when the shoes stopped pretending. Isaiah was 9, 4th grade. The hole in the right sole had grown wide enough that he could feel the pavement through it on dry days and feel the water on wet ones. He had taken a piece of cardboard from a cereal box and cut it to the shape of his foot. He placed it inside the shoe every morning. By noon, it was soft. By the end of the school day, it was flat. He replaced it every 2 or 3 days, depending on the weather. He never mentioned it. The laces had broken twice. The first time he knotted them. The second time the knot didn't hold, so he pulled the drawstring from an old hoodie and threaded it through the eyelets. It worked. Not well, but enough. The toe cap on the left shoe had separated from the sole completely on one side. He found a video on the computer at the school library that showed how to fix a shoe with rubber cement. He bought a small tube from the dollar store for $1.25. He fixed it at the kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon while Marlene was sleeping between shifts. She never saw him do it. The shoe held for another 3 months. Deshaun Avery ran a free basketball program at Bethel Baptist Church on Saturdays. He had done it for 6 years. No fees, no registration forms, just a gym, some basketballs, and whatever kids showed up between 1 and 4 p.m. He was 41, had played 2 years at a junior college in Indiana before his knee ended that, and had spent the rest of his working life driving a city bus on the Route 17 line. The basketball program was not his job. It was the thing that made the job bearable. Isaiah started coming in September. He was quiet the way most new kids were quiet, standing near the wall watching the older boys play, waiting to be invited. Deshaun invited him on the 2nd Saturday. Isaiah played. He was quick, good instincts, moved well without the ball. But Deshaun noticed something. The boy's cuts were different. His stops were late. He slid on direction changes where other kids planted. Deshaun watched his feet. He saw the shoes, the worn soles, the drawstring laces, the glue line on the left toe. He didn't say a word to Isaiah about any of it. The following Monday, Deshaun called Marlene. She picked up on the fourth ring, already tense. She said, "Is Isaiah okay?" "Did something happen?" Deshaun said. "Nothing happened. Your son is one of the hardest working kids I've seen in 6 years of running this program. I just wanted you to know that." A pause. Marlene said, "Thank you." She said it the way people say thank you when they haven't heard something good about themselves or their child in a long time and don't quite know where to put it. Deshaun said he's welcome every Saturday, no matter what. They hung up. He did not mention the shoes. The following Saturday, there was a cardboard box in the corner of the gym near the water fountain. Handwritten sign taped to the front. "Free shoes, all sizes, take what you need." Deshaun had put it there Friday night. He hadn't announced it. He just placed it and left it. Isaiah walked into the gym. He saw the box. He walked over to it slowly and looked inside. There were maybe 8 or 9 pairs, different sizes, different colors. A couple of them were nearly new. He stood there for about 10 seconds. He looked at the shoes in the box. He looked down at his own. The cardboard insole, the drawstring laces, the glue on the toe. Then he turned around and walked to the court. He picked up a ball and started shooting. He didn't take a pair. Deshaun watched from the doorway. He understood. The kind of understanding that doesn't come from asking questions, but from recognizing something you've seen before. The particular pride of a child who has decided that what he has is what he has and he is not going to take. Something that might make him feel like he needed saving. It was the same pride his mother carried up the stairs every morning at 6:30 a.m. It had been passed down without a single conversation about it. That evening, Marlene was folding laundry on the couch when Isaiah came out of the bathroom barefoot, his shoes by the front door. She looked at them. She said, "Isaiah, do you need new shoes?" He looked at her. He said, "They still work, Mom." His voice was steadier than the last time he'd said it. Calmer. Not defensive. Just settled the way a person sounds when they have repeated something enough times that it has become a kind of truth they have built around themselves. Marlene looked at him longer than she meant to. She almost said something. She didn't. She went back to folding. 2 weeks into 4th grade, Mr. Hammond gave the class a writing assignment. What is something you own that is important to you? The other children wrote about video games, bikes, stuffed animals, a baseball signed by a relative. Isaiah wrote about his shoes. He did not complain about them. He did not say they were broken or old or ugly. He wrote that they were the last thing his mother was happy buying him. He wrote that he remembered the store, the parking lot, the way she counted the money in her hand before she paid. He wrote, "When my mom bought me these shoes, she smiled different. The kind of smile that goes all the way." He wrote that he takes care of them because they came from a day when things felt like they were going to be okay. Mr. Hammond read the paper after school. He sat at his desk for a while. Then he found Isaiah the next morning before first period. He said, "Isaiah, can I talk to you for a second?" Isaiah stood by the desk. "Mr. Hammond said, 'Is everything okay at home?' Isaiah said. "Yes, sir." Mr. Hammond looked at Isaiah's shoes. Isaiah saw him look. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes closed, the way a door closes when someone gets too close to a room you've been keeping private. He said, "They still work." Mr. Hammond heard the sentence. He also heard what was underneath it. He said, "Okay." He didn't push. That evening, 11:30 p.m., Marlene's phone buzzed at the packing plant. She stepped off the line to check it. A voicemail from a number she didn't recognize. She played it during her break. Mr. Hammond's voice. He said, "Miss Okafor, this is James Hammond, Isaiah's teacher. Nothing is wrong. Your son is not in any trouble. I just wanted to call and tell you that he's one of the most remarkable kids I've ever taught. That's all. Thank you." Marlene stood in the break room with the phone against her ear. She played it again. The same words Deshaun had used. Different man, different context, same sentence. "Your son is remarkable." She had heard it before. But standing in that break room at 11:30 at night, under fluorescent lights with 9 hours of packing still in her hands, she heard it differently. She stood there for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you," to a voicemail that couldn't hear her, and she said it quieter than she normally said anything. She told Lorna about the call 2 days later. They were on the stairwell again. It had become a thing by then, not every morning, but enough mornings that neither of them pretended it was accidental anymore. "Marlene said Isaiah's teacher called me," Lorna said. "What did he say?" Marlene said. "That Isaiah's remarkable." She paused. She said, "He probably thinks I can't even buy my kid shoes." Lorna looked at her. She said, "And what does your son think?" Marlene didn't answer. Lorna said, "I taught 35 years. You know what I saw? 2 kinds of children. Children who had everything and couldn't tell you who was paying attention to them. And children who had almost nothing but could tell you exactly who in their life showed up." She let that sit. Then she said, "Your son knows exactly who you are. That is not something money buys. That is not something a new pair of shoes gives a child. That is something that comes from being there. Day after day after day. In the dark, in the tired, in the math that doesn't add up, being there anyway." Marlene was looking at the wall. Lorna said, "You know what's never in the news? You know what nobody ever writes a headline about? A woman who works a night shift and still makes breakfast in the morning? A woman who hasn't bought herself a new shirt in 2 years, but makes sure her child has clean clothes every single day. That kind of work doesn't show up in any system. It doesn't get counted. Nobody applauds it." She paused. "A mother who can't afford new shoes gets judged. A father who can't afford new shoes gets sympathy. I've watched that play out for 35 years. It hasn't changed." Marlene said nothing. She was looking at her hands. Lorna said, "You are not failing, Marlene. You are doing the hardest work there is with the fewest resources available. And the result is a 9-year-old boy who writes about you like you are the most important person in the world. Because to him, you are." They sat in silence. Lorna stood up after a while. She said, "I'll see you tomorrow." Marlene said, "Lorna." Lorna stopped. Marlene said, "He really wrote about me," Lorna said. "You should ask him sometime." Marlene nodded slowly. She didn't ask. Not that day. Not the next. But that night, after the shift, after breakfast, after Isaiah left for school, she stood in his room and looked at him sleeping for a long time, longer than she usually allowed herself. Then she went to bed. 2 weeks before Isaiah's birthday, Marlene picked up extra shifts, 3 doubles in 1 week. That meant clocking in at 10 p.m., working through to 6 a.m., sleeping 3 hours, then coming back for the afternoon loading dock from 2 to 6 p.m. before the night shift started again. She did this Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. By Thursday, her hands were shaking during the break room coffee. She didn't mention it. She had a number in her head. $45. That was the price of a pair of running shoes at the outlet store on Broadway. Not the best pair. Not the cheapest either. A real pair. The kind with actual cushioning and laces that didn't need replacing, and a sole that would grip a basketball court the way a sole is supposed to. She had looked them up on her phone during a break 2 weeks earlier. She had checked the size. She had checked the price. She had done the math. 3 extra shifts at time and a half would get her there by the Tuesday before his birthday. That was the plan. The building's washing machine broke on a Monday. The landlord said he'd have it fixed by the end of the week. The end of the week came and went. Marlene started taking their clothes to the laundromat on Ridge Road. $8 a load. She went twice that week. $16 she hadn't planned for. Then Isaiah's school sent home a list of required materials for the spring term. 2 workbooks and a folder. $22 at the bookstore near campus. She could have said no. She could have told the teacher they'd get them later. She bought them on Wednesday. Then Isaiah got sick. 3 days of fever, a cough that kept him up at night, and a bottle of children's cold medicine from the pharmacy that cost $14 because the generic was out of stock, and the pharmacist said the brand name was all they had. She bought it without hesitating. She hesitated about everything else. She never hesitated about him. The $45 was no longer $45. It was $45 minus $16 minus $22 minus $14. The math didn't work anymore. She knew it on the bus ride home from the pharmacy. She knew it the way you know something before you're willing to say it, by the weight in your chest and the specific silence in your head when the numbers stop cooperating and you stop trying to make them. Keisha saw it. Keisha always saw it. They were in the break room, 3 a.m., the usual paper cups, the usual quiet. Keisha said, "Let me lend you something." Marlene said no. Keisha said, "Marlene." Marlene said, "I said no." Her voice was even, not angry, just closed. The kind of closed that tells you the door isn't going to open tonight, and pushing on it will only make the lock tighter. Keisha didn't push. She nodded. They went back to the line. The next night, Marlene opened her locker before the shift and found a white envelope sitting on top of her jacket. No name on it. No note. She picked it up. She could feel the bills inside. She stood there for a moment, looking at it. Then she walked to Keisha's locker, placed the envelope on top of Keisha's bag, and went to the line. Neither of them said a word about it. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not ever. Some refusals are not about pride. They are about the only thing you have left that feels like yours, and you cannot let go of it, even when letting go would be easier, because letting go would mean admitting that the thing you promised yourself you could do, you cannot do. 10 days before the birthday. 2 a.m. The apartment was dark. Marlene was in the kitchen. She was not sitting at the table. She was standing at the counter, with both hands flat on the surface, her head down, her shoulders pulling inward in a way that made her look smaller than she was. She was crying, not the kind of crying that makes noise. The kind that holds itself in, that pulls the sound down into the body and keeps it there, because the walls are thin and the bedroom is 12 feet away and the boy in that bedroom cannot hear this. She shook. Her shoulders moved. Her mouth was open, but nothing came out. The only sound was her breathing, and even that she was trying to control. Isaiah was awake. He had been awake for several minutes. He didn't know what woke him. A sound, maybe, or the absence of one. The apartment had a rhythm at night, and when that rhythm broke even slightly, he noticed. He stood in the doorway of his room. He could see the kitchen from there. He could see her shape in the dark, the way her back curved, the way her hands gripped the counter edge. He stood there for 4 minutes. He didn't go in. He didn't say, "Mom." He didn't make a sound. He just watched the way a child watches when they understand something they cannot fix, and the only thing they can do is witness it without adding to its weight. Then he went back to bed. He pulled the blanket up. He lay there with his eyes open for a long time. The next morning, Marlene made breakfast: eggs, toast, a glass of juice. She was dressed. Her face showed nothing. Isaiah sat at the table and ate. He said, "Thanks, Mom." She said, "You're welcome, baby." Everything was normal. Everything was exactly the way it always was. Neither of them mentioned the night before. Neither of them would. But that afternoon after school, Isaiah took a piece of lined paper from his notebook. He sat at his desk and wrote something. Then he erased it. He wrote it again. Different words. He erased those too. He sat for a while looking at the blank paper, with the faint ghost of erased pencil marks still visible. Then he wrote again. This time, he didn't erase. He folded the paper once, then twice, until it was small enough to fit in the front pocket of his jeans. He put it there. He carried it to school the next day, and the day after that, and every day after that. That Saturday, Deshaun had a pair of sneakers in his hand when Isaiah walked into the gym at Bethel Baptist. White, new, the right size. He had bought them himself from the sporting goods store on Grant Street. He held them out as Isaiah passed. He said, "Hey, Isaiah, my nephew outgrew these. They're just sitting in a closet. You want them." Isaiah stopped. He looked at the shoes. He looked at Deshaun. He looked at the shoes again. They were clean and white, and the laces were factory tied, and the soles were perfect. He could feel the cardboard shifting inside his own shoe as he stood there. He said, "Thank you, Coach. But my mom's going to get me new ones." Deshaun looked at him. He knew that wasn't true. He also knew something else. He knew that the boy standing in front of him needed that sentence to be true more than he needed the shoes. The belief that his mother was going to take care of it, that she always did, that she always would, was load-bearing. It was holding something up that new shoes couldn't replace. Deshawn said, "Okay. Offer stands if you change your mind." Isaiah said, "Yes, sir." Then he turned, walked to the court, picked up a ball, and played for the next 2 hours in shoes that slid on every cut and didn't grip on a single stop. He was still the fastest kid there. He still played the hardest. Deshawn watched from the sideline. He made a phone call that evening. Not to Marlene, to Lorna. He had known Lorna for years. Gary was that kind of city. Small enough that the people who cared about other people eventually found each other. He said, "You know Marlene Okafor?" Lorna said, "I know her." Deshawn said, "That boy of hers." Lorna said, "I know." A pause. Deshawn said, "He turned down new shoes today. Brand new, right size. Looked at them like they were exactly what he wanted. And then said no, because he said his mom was going to get him some." Lorna was quiet. Then she said, "That sounds about right." Deshawn said, "He gets it from her, doesn't he?" Lorna said, "Every bit of it." They didn't make a plan. They didn't coordinate anything. They just knew the way people know when they've been watching the same story from different windows. That the family upstairs was carrying something heavy and carrying it well, and that the best thing to do was to stay close without crowding. 3 days before the birthday. After the night shift, Marlene sat at the kitchen table with her phone open to her bank account. $11.40. She closed the app, opened it again. Still, Elva, Fira. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a fold of bills, a 5 and 2 ones. $7. She laid them on the table next to the phone. $18.40 total. The shoes were $45. She sat there looking at the distance between those two numbers the way you look at a gap that used to feel crossable and now doesn't. She thought about her mother. Her mother had died 4 years ago, 6 months after Derek left. Cancer caught late because the insurance didn't cover the scan that would have caught it early. Her mother had always found a way. When the rent was short, when the car broke, when the school needed money for a trip, she had always found a way. Marlene could hear her voice sometimes on the bad nights saying, "Figure it out, baby. You always do." But she was sitting at this table at 7 a.m. with $18.40 and her son turning 10 inches 3 days and no way to figure it out. The voice didn't come tonight. Lorna knocked. Marlene didn't answer at first. Lorna knocked again. Marlene opened the door. Lorna was holding a pan of cornbread wrapped in foil. She didn't say good morning. She didn't ask how the shift was. She came in, set the cornbread on the counter, and sat down at the table across from Marlene. She looked at the phone screen and the bills on the table. She didn't comment on them. They sat. After a while, Marlene said, "I can't even buy my son shoes for his birthday, Lorna." She said it flat, not crying, not dramatic, just a fact delivered in the voice of someone who has run out of ways to make facts sound better than they are. It was the first time she had said it out loud. The first time she had stopped holding the sentence in her body and let it exist in the room. Lorna didn't rush. She sat with it. Then she said, "When my husband died, I couldn't afford the flowers for the funeral. I couldn't afford them. 42 years of marriage, and I couldn't buy flowers for the man." She paused. "I went to the vacant lot behind the church. I picked wildflowers, dandelions, Queen Anne's lace, whatever was growing. I put them in a jar on the casket." She looked at Marlene. "And you know what? 30 years later, I don't remember a single arrangement anyone else brought. Not one. I remember the ones I picked, because those were mine. Those were what I had." Marlene didn't speak. The kitchen was quiet. The cornbread was cooling on the counter. Somewhere outside the morning was starting, and Isaiah would be awake in an hour, and the day would need to begin again the way it always did, but for now the quiet held. The night before Isaiah's birthday, Marlene rode the bus home from her last shift. She sat in the window seat near the back, the one with the cracked armrest and the vent that didn't work. The city moved past in the dark. Street lights closed, storefronts the parking lot of the dollar store on Broadway. She looked at it as the bus passed. Then she pulled the cord. She got off. She walked into the store. She bought a box of cake mix, a small tub of butter, a carton of eggs, a bag of powdered sugar, and a candle shaped like the number 10, $9.80. She paid in cash. She had $8.60 left. That was gas money for next week. That was everything. She got home at 6:15 a.m. Isaiah was asleep. She put her bag down, washed her hands, and opened the cake mix. The oven in the apartment ran hot on the left side and cool on the right. She had learned this over 3 years of reheating casseroles and frozen meals that came out half warm and half done. She turned the tray 3 times during the 25 minutes it baked. The cake came out slightly burned on the left edge. She cut the burned part off with a kitchen knife. She mixed the powdered sugar with butter and a little water until it was smooth enough to spread. She spread it over the cake. It wasn't even. The top dipped in the center where the cake had sunk. She covered it as best she could. She found a knife thin enough to write with. She scraped "Happy Birthday, Isaiah" into the frosting. The H was fine. The A was fine. The I tilted to the right. She tried to straighten it. It tilted further. She tried again. Worse. She stopped. She put the knife down. She stood there, looking at the cake on the kitchen table. The tilted I. The frosting that was too thin on one side. The place where the burned edge had been cut away and the shape was no longer round. The candle sitting next to it still, in its plastic wrapper. Her hands were dusted with flour. The oven was still clicking as it cooled. She thought, "This is all I have." She stood there. She thought it again. "This is all I have." The same words. But the second time, they landed differently. Not as an apology. Not as defeat. As a statement. A quiet, exhausted, irreducible statement of what was true. "This is all I have, and I made it, and it is here, and tomorrow morning my son will see it." She washed her hands. She turned off the kitchen light. She went to bed. Isaiah woke up at 7:02. He lay in bed for a moment the way he always did, eyes open, listening to the apartment before moving through it. He heard the kitchen. Something was different. Not a sound exactly. A smell. Sugar and butter and something slightly burned underneath, faint but there. He got up. He walked down the short hallway in bare feet, his old shoes still by the front door where he had left them the night before. He came around the corner into the kitchen and stopped. There was a cake on the table. It was not a large cake. It was not a perfect cake. The frosting was thinner on one side than the other, and the shape was slightly uneven where a piece had been trimmed away. There was a candle shaped like the number 10 lying next to it still in its plastic wrapper. Written across the top in frosting were the words, "Happy Birthday, Isaiah." The I was tilted. It leaned to the right in a way that said someone had tried to fix it and then decided to leave it alone. Beside the cake was a card, handmade. Folded construction paper, the kind they had in the kitchen drawer. Marlene's handwriting on the inside. There was no box, no wrapping paper, no shoes. Marlene was standing by the counter. She had changed out of her work clothes. She had washed her face and pulled her hair back. She looked the way she always looked when she was making sure the surface held calm and steady and present, even though she had been awake for 26 hours and her hands still smelled like powdered sugar. She said, "Happy birthday, baby." Isaiah looked at the cake. He looked at it for a long time. The tilted eye, the candle, the uneven frosting. Marlene watched him looking, and she read the silence as disappointment. She had been preparing for this moment since she put the cake down 3 hours ago. She started to speak. She said, "I know it's not much. I was going to get you something else, but things came up and Isaiah said, "You made this." She stopped. She said, "Yes." He said, "By yourself." She said, "Yes." He stepped closer to the table. He reached out and touched the frosting with one finger right on the tilted eye. He ran his fingertip along it gently, like he was reading it. Then he smiled. It was the first time the story pauses to describe his smile. Not the polite kind, not the quick kind, the kind of smile that starts in the eyes before it reaches the mouth, the kind that takes a moment to build because it's coming from somewhere deeper than reflex. He said, "Can we eat it now?" Marlene said, "It's 7 inches the morning." Isaiah said, "It's my birthday." She looked at him. Then she laughed. A short one surprised out of her. She got a knife. She cut 2 pieces. She put them on plates, the plates that didn't match the ones from the set she'd bought at the thrift store on 4th Street 3 years ago. She set them on the table. They sat across from each other. They ate cake at 7 inches the morning. The apartment was quiet. The light coming through the kitchen window was the pale, early kind that makes everything look softer than it is. Isaiah ate his piece slowly. Marlene ate hers. Neither of them said anything for a few minutes. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that happens when 2 people are in the middle of something small and complete, and neither one wants to be the first to break it. There was a knock on the door. Marlene got up and opened it. Lorna was standing there holding a small box wrapped in newspaper. She said, "I'm not staying. I just wanted to bring this by." Marlene said, "Come in, Lorna." Lorna came in. She saw the cake. She saw Isaiah at the table with frosting on his fork. She sat down. Isaiah opened the box. Inside was a book. Old, the spine soft, the cover worn in the way that said it had been held many times by many hands. It was a children's book, the kind with a tree on the cover. Inside the front cover, in Lorna's careful handwriting, it said, "For Isaiah, who already knows what this book is about." Isaiah read the inscription. He looked at Lorna. He said, "Thank you, Mrs. Lorna." Lorna said, "You're welcome, sweetheart." She didn't stay long. She had a cup of coffee, looked at the cake, told Marlene the frosting was good, and went back downstairs. The morning settled. That afternoon, Deshawn opened the gym at Bethel Baptist 2 hours early. He had called Marlene the day before and said, "Bring Isaiah by around 3. I've got something small." When they arrived, there were 6 kids from the Saturday program already there. A folding table near the wall had a cooler of sodas and a plate of cookies that Lorna had baked that morning and sent over with Deshawn's wife. No banner, no balloons, just a gym, a basketball, some kids, and enough sugar to make the afternoon feel different from every other afternoon. Isaiah played. He played in the shoes he had been wearing for 3 years, the ones with the cardboard insole and the drawstring laces and the glue on the left toe. He cut and stopped and planted and slid, and he was still faster than anyone on the court. He scored 14 points in a pickup game that nobody was officially keeping score of, but Deshawn was, because Deshawn always was. Marlene sat on the bench outside the gym with Lorna. The spring sun was warm enough to sit in. They could hear the ball bouncing through the open doors, the sneakers on concrete, the shouting that children do when they are being children and nothing else. Lorna said, "Look at him." Marlene looked. Isaiah was laughing. A real one. Full. He had just stolen the ball from a boy, a head taller than him, and was driving to the basket with his entire body leaned forward and his worn-out shoes somehow holding together for one more cut. Lorna said, "He's not thinking about shoes right now." Marlene said, "I am." Lorna said, "I know." They sat for a moment. Then Lorna said, "Marlene, can I tell you something I learned in 35 years of watching children?" Marlene said, "Yes." Lorna said, "Children don't remember what you bought them. They remember how you made them feel when you had nothing to buy." Marlene didn't answer, but she watched Isaiah differently after that. She watched the way he high-fived the boy he'd stolen the ball from. She watched the way he passed to the smallest kid on the court, the one who hadn't scored yet, and then celebrated when the kid made it. She watched him run in those shoes 3 years old, falling apart, held together by glue and cardboard, and a boy who refused to let them be a problem. She watched, and for the first time in a long time, she saw what everyone else had been seeing. Not what was missing, what was there. They got home at 6:30. Isaiah took a bath. Marlene cleaned the kitchen. She washed the cake plates. She put the leftover cake in the fridge. She wiped down the counter. Normal things. End of day things. The kind of small domestic motions that hold a house together without anyone noticing they are happening. Isaiah came out of the bathroom in his pajamas. His hair was still damp. He walked to the living room. He stopped in the doorway. Marlene was at the sink with her back to him. He stood there. In his right hand, held close to his side, was a small piece of paper folded twice. The piece of paper he had been carrying in his pocket for 10 days. He said, "Mom." She turned around. He said, "I have something for you." She dried her hands on the towel. She looked at him. She said, "Baby, it's your birthday. You don't have to give me anything." He walked to her. He held out the paper. She took it. She unfolded it. Inside, in the handwriting of a 10-year-old boy, neat and careful, written and erased and rewritten until the words were exactly right, were 6 words. "Thank you for never giving up." Marlene read them. She read them again. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked at Isaiah. He was standing in front of her, with his hands at his sides, looking at her with the particular steadiness of a child who has rehearsed this moment and decided he would not cry during it. His eyes were dry. His chin was level. He had practiced this. She tried to speak. She couldn't. The sound that came out of her was not a word. It was the sound that happens when something that has been held in place for 3 years, held by willpower and routine, and the daily act of getting up and going to work and making breakfast and pretending the numbers add up finally lets go. She cried. Not the way she cried at 2 a.m. in the kitchen with her shoulders pulled in and her mouth closed. She cried with her whole body, open, uncontrolled. The kind of crying that doesn't care who hears it because it is no longer possible to care. Isaiah stepped forward. He put his arms around her. His head came to her shoulder now. 10 years old. He held her. He said, "I hear you at night sometimes. When you think, I'm sleeping." She cried harder. Her hands gripped the back of his pajama shirt. She couldn't stop. She didn't try. He said, "You don't have to buy me shoes, Mom. You already gave me everything." The apartment was quiet except for her. The kitchen light was on. The bathroom light was still on from his bath. The hallway was dark. They stood in the living room at 8 p.m. on his birthday holding each other, and neither of them moved for a long time. The piece of paper was in her hand, pressed against his back where she held him. 6 words. Written by a boy who had watched his mother fight for 3 years without ever telling her he was watching. Written and erased and rewritten over 10 days until each word was exactly the one he meant. Carried in his pocket to school and back to the basketball court and back to the kitchen table and back waiting for the right moment, which was this one. Not because the moment was perfect, because he had decided it was time. Outside, Gary was doing what Gary did on a weeknight. Traffic on 5th, the distant sound of a train on the freight line south of Broadway. The streetlight outside the apartment window casting the same orange glow it cast every night inside a mother and her son. A piece of paper. 6 words. The kitchen light still on. The next morning, Marlene woke up early. Not for the shift. The shift wasn't until tonight. She woke up because her body didn't know any other way. She lay in bed for a few minutes. Then she got up. She went to the kitchen. She took the piece of paper from where she had left it on the counter the night before, beside the card and the candle wrapper. She opened the junk drawer. She found a magnet, the blue one from the dentist's office, that had been in the drawer for 2 years. She put the paper on the refrigerator door. She pressed the magnet over it. She stepped back. 6 words in a 10-year-old's handwriting, held in place by a free magnet on a second-hand refrigerator in an apartment on Polk Street in Gary, Indiana. She would see it every morning when she opened the door for the milk. Every single morning. She stood there, looking at it for a while. Then she picked up her phone. She called Keisha. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday. Keisha picked up on the 3rd ring. Her voice was thick with sleep. She said, "Marlene. Everything okay?" Marlene said, "I'm okay. I just wanted someone to know that." Keisha was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. Now say it again like you mean it." Marlene laughed. It was a real laugh. The first one the story has given her that was not polite, not protective, not performing. Just a laugh. She said, "I mean it." Keisha said, "Then I believe you." They talked for 3 more minutes about nothing important. Then they hung up. Marlene went downstairs. She knocked on Lorna's door. Lorna opened it already dressed, already with coffee. Marlene stood in the doorway and told her what happened the night before. The paper, the 6 words, the way Isaiah had stood there with his hands at his sides and said what he said. Lorna listened. She didn't interrupt. When Marlene finished, Lorna didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say, "See, I knew it." She said, "He's going to be fine." A pause. She said, "And so are you." Marlene nodded. She went back upstairs. That afternoon, Deshawn called. Isaiah picked up. Deshawn said, "Happy belated young man. How was the birthday?" Isaiah said, "Best birthday ever, coach." Deshawn said, "Yeah. What'd you get?" Isaiah was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I gave my mom something." Deshawn didn't respond immediately. There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that happens when a grown man hears something from a 10-year-old that he wasn't ready for. Then he said, "That's a good birthday, kid," Isaiah said. "Yes, sir." They hung up. Deshawn sat in his living room for a while after that. He didn't call Lorna. He didn't call Marlene. He just sat. Some things just need a minute before you know where to put them. 6 months later, the plant gave Marlene a permanent addition to her schedule. Not a promotion, not a raise in title, an extra 8 hours a week, locked in, written on the board in the shift office with her name next to it instead of the rotating list. It was enough. Not enough to be comfortable. Enough to stop doing the math at 2 a.m. Enough to pay the electric bill the week it was due instead of the week after. Enough to look at the notebook on the kitchen table and not feel the numbers pressing back. She bought Isaiah new shoes on a Saturday in October, $38 from the outlet store on Broadway. Not the $45 pair she had looked at 6 months earlier. A different pair, dark blue, the kind with real cushioning and laces that threaded through metal eyelets instead of fabric ones. She did not buy a size and a half too large. She bought his exact size. She held the box on the bus ride home and kept it on her lap the entire way. Isaiah was at the kitchen table doing homework when she came in. She set the box in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her. She said, "Open it." He lifted the lid. He looked at the shoes inside. He didn't say anything for a moment. He picked one up, turned it over, ran his thumb along the sole, the way he had run his thumb along the old sole 100 times, checking for wear, checking for holes. There were none. The rubber was thick and clean, and the tread was deep, and the color was even. He put it down. He said, "These are for me," she said. "Happy late birthday." He took both shoes out of the box. He put them on. He stood up. He walked across the kitchen, turned, walked back. The shoes fit. They didn't slide. They didn't lean. They gripped the floor the way shoes are supposed to grip the floor, and the absence of the familiar wobble felt like something new under his feet. He walked to the living room and back one more time. Then he sat down and took them off. He set the new shoes on the floor. Then he got up, went to the front door, and came back with the old ones. He placed them side by side next to the new pair. 2 pairs of shoes on the kitchen floor. One dark blue and clean, with thick soles and metal eyelets. One gray-white and leaning with a cardboard insole visible through the gap where the right sole had separated drawstring laces, threaded through torn eyelets, a line of dried rubber cement along the left toe. Marlene looked at them. She said, "What are you doing?" Isaiah said. "Keeping them." She said, "The old ones." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Baby, they're falling apart." Isaiah looked at the old shoes on the floor. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at his mother. He said, "They got me here." Marlene didn't speak. She looked at the shoes. 3 years. Every morning, every walk to school, every Saturday at Bethel Baptist, every recess where he ran faster than anyone else on a sole that had no grip left. Every night he wiped them down. Every morning he tied them with a double knot. Every time he cut a new piece of cardboard to fit inside. Every time someone offered him something else, and he said no. She looked at those shoes, and for the first time she did not see what she had failed to replace. She saw what had held. She saw the glue he had applied himself from a tube he bought with $1.25. She saw the drawstring he had threaded through when the laces broke. She saw the cardboard insole cut to the shape of his foot, replaced every 3 days. She saw 3 years of a boy taking care of what he had, because what he had came from her. And she understood, standing in that kitchen, that the shoes had never been about the shoes. Isaiah put on the new pair. He said, "I'm going to go show Coach." He went out. She heard him on the stairs. She heard the front door. She stood in the kitchen alone. She picked up the old shoes. She held them for a moment. They weighed almost nothing. The canvas was soft from 3 years of washing and wearing and bending. She carried them to the shelf beside the refrigerator. She set them there next to the piece of paper held in place by the blue magnet. A pair of worn-out shoes and 6 words in a child's handwriting. She stepped back. She looked at them together. 2 things that should not have meant anything and meant everything. She didn't need to say the sentence. It was already there in the room, in the shoes, in the paper, in the 3 years between a clearance rack on Michigan Avenue and this kitchen on a Saturday afternoon in October. They still work, Mom. She went to the sink. She started the dishes. Sunday morning, noon. Lorna's phone rang. She picked up. Raymond's voice, her son from Atlanta. The usual Sunday call. They talked for a few minutes about the weather, about his wife's new job, about the gutters on the house that needed cleaning. Then a different voice came on the line. Smaller, brighter. Grandma Lorna smiled. She said, "Hey, baby. Malik was 8. He had his father's voice already, the pitch of it, but the rhythm was all Lorna's. He said, "Grandma, are you lonely?" Lorna sat down in her chair by the window. She said, "No, baby, I'm not lonely." He said, "But you live by yourself." She said, "I've got neighbors." He said, "What kind of neighbors?" Lorna looked up at the ceiling. She could hear the footsteps above her, the rhythm she had learned over 3 years. The front door, the heavy walk, the water, the smaller footsteps 20 minutes later. She said, "There's a woman upstairs who works all night and comes home every morning and raises her son by herself. And her son is one of the finest young people I have ever met in my life." She paused. "He wrote her 6 words on his birthday that would have made your grandfather cry," Malik said. "What 6 words?" Lorna said. "Ask me when you're older," Malik said. "Grandma," Lorna said, "some stories need time to land, baby. You'll understand that one day." Malik was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Okay. But you have to remember to tell me." Lorna said, "I'll remember." They said goodbye. She put the phone down. She sat in her chair by the window. The apartment was quiet. The Sunday light came through the glass in long stripes across the floor. Above her, the footsteps. 6:30 a.m. Marlene had just come home from the night shift. The front door closing, the heavy walk that was maybe a little less heavy than it had been a year ago, or maybe Lorna was imagining that, or maybe it didn't matter, the water running. Then, 20 minutes later, the smaller footsteps. Isaiah awake. The sound of the kitchen, a cabinet, a plate. Breakfast happening the way it happened every morning. Lorna listened. She had heard this rhythm 1,000 times, but she heard it differently now. Not as a pattern, as proof. That somewhere above her in a kitchen, with a crooked letter on a shelf and 6 words on the refrigerator, the morning was starting, and it would start again tomorrow. And the day after that. She closed her eyes. She sat in the chair. She listened. Marlene Okafor did not become a millionaire. Isaiah Okafor did not receive a scholarship to a famous university. The apartment on Polk Street is still the apartment on Polk Street. The oven still runs hot on the left side. The bus still comes late on Tuesdays. The old shoes are still on the shelf. The piece of paper is still on the refrigerator, held in place by a blue magnet from a dentist's office. Some people will say that 6 words on a piece of paper don't change anything, that a child shouldn't have to carry what Isaiah carried, that a 10-year-old should not have to watch his mother through a doorway at 2 a.m. and decide on his own that the right thing to do is not ask for what he doesn't have but thank her for what she gave, that a mother should not have to choose between shoes and electricity in a country with more wealth than any civilization in human history. All of that is true. But there is also this. A 10-year-old boy watched his mother fight for 3 years without a single night off. He watched her make breakfast after overnight shifts. He watched her count money at the kitchen table and put letters in drawers and smile when the smile didn't reach her eyes. He watched all of it. And on his birthday, instead of asking for what he didn't have, he sat down with a pencil and a piece of paper and he wrote the only thing he knew how to give. 6 words. Thank you for never giving up. Whether that breaks your heart or fills, it is yours to decide. If this story reminded you of someone in your life who never heard those 6 words, share it with them. Subscribe. New stories every week. See you in the next one.